for joining me for WMW Wednesday. I'm so excited today to have another special guest, Theresa Fagundes Diener. While I am a communications and speech expert, Theresa is a speech expert of a different sort, right? Tell us what you do, Theresa.
I am a speech language pathologist. I work primarily with children, helping them grow their voices or develop their language skills.
So we just wrapped up a session right now to prepare Theresa for a webinar that she's giving next week. And it was really fun because this is the first time coaching someone through a webinar, and we thought it would be helpful to share some of these tips with you in case you're working on a webinar, thinking about designing and producing a webinar for your own audience. So the first tip we want to talk about today is the audience in front of you. There is none, basically, when you're doing a webinar. You don't have eyes to look at, you can't make eye contact, you don't get the nods from the audience, the feedback. So what did you learn tonight, Theresa, to help you through that?
Well, this was the hardest part of practice at home for me because I typically hold my script in my hands and I look out and I envision my audience in front of me and I envision myself making eye contact with members of the audience. And so practice was a lot different. And so Jessica had a really great tip. So she shared with me that instead of looking out or looking across, I need to focus in on this green dot. And that's my new target eye for my eye contact practice.
And one way to practice, because it's kind of awkward to have to see yourself on screen right in front of you. So I told Theresa she could try this out. So you could go to Google Hangouts and then start a video call, but instead of inviting someone to call you or for you to call, you just X out the box and then you will be on this screen here on my right. And that way you can see yourself and get used to having the box of your own image in your peripheral view so that you can get used to it and it doesn't feel awkward once the webinar actually starts, right?
It really helped.
So another tip when it comes to audience engagement, again, you're not getting feedback from the audience. So how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep their attention? And one way Theresa, I think, is using it well for her webinar is through props and images on her slides, examples, and videos. So explain a little bit of how you use those in your webinar.
Yes, so I'm preparing a webinar to help families of children who have childhood apraxia of speech, which is a motor speech disorder where children have a hard time making the movements necessary to produce speech and produce the messages they want to say. And I am presenting this webinar that's hosted by the Childhood Apraxia of Speech Association of North America, CASANA. And one thing that I'm really trying to do is incorporate some strategies that families can use right away at home. And so I'm including videos, including props, and just demonstrating treatment methods right within my webinar.
Perfect. Other ways to engage with your audience, a really effective way that I've found as an audience member too, is asking questions and polling your audience. So you could have multiple choices to poll your audience and they can type in what their response is. You could ask questions. So Theresa's going to ask questions to be able to bring the parent into that situation to try to evoke that emotion that they might have felt in that moment. Maybe taking their child to the grocery store and having your child to communicate with the clerk. Have you ever been, for example, she could ask, have you ever been in a situation where you feel frustrated because your child is not able to find a listener who understands him or her? Or when did you feel empowered when you felt that your child was really understood? Or what are some other examples that you might use?
Well, and I do think that last example is a great one because it is our goal to empower parents. And one example that comes about this time of year has to do with performance narratives. So performing in a class play, for example. And many of our children want to participate in the play, but families and teachers aren't always sure of how to include them, even though they really want to include them. And so we talk about that and ways to include and involve children with childhood apraxia of speech, being mindful of their needs and of their disorder, but also allowing them to grow their voices and empowering them and also empowering their families.
So when we transitioned into that part of her presentation, I suggested to her to ask, tis the season, we're getting into that time of year where you all as parents are preparing for the holiday play at school, right? But do you feel like maybe your child's not ready? No. Encourage your child. You can find a way to incorporate your child, include your child in these plays, and then she can go into the content and her suggestions. So a cool part, the third tip we want to share with you tonight, cool part about a webinar compared to presenting to a live audience is that you can have a cheat sheet that you may not want to use in a live situation. So Theresa can have her notes on the keyboard. And what's the tip you learned tonight about how to
so this is a very important tip, everyone. When you are, I'll be back. When passing your notes, it's important to do so like this, quietly and smoothly, because if you like this, everyone will see you. Everyone will see you turning your pages, and that isn't exactly the body language that we want to convey.
Right.
So we do have to be mindful of some body language.
Right, and you could hear the pages flipping. So that was a little tip from my news anchoring days, how we flipped our scripts. Related to that topic, the fourth tip we're going to talk about is body language. Another cool part that you don't have to worry about when you're doing a webinar. You don't have to worry about pacing the stage, using your hand gestures. You just have to focus on your facial expressions because that's all your audience sees. And the fifth tip we want to talk about tonight, really important point that I tell you about and share with you the importance of all the time, is storytelling. It's so important whether you are in a webinar, whether you're in front of a live audience, whether you're doing a video. Storytelling is what connects you as the speaker to your audience. And since Theresa's webinar is about storytelling, the importance and the power of storytelling, you had a really great quote in your webinar. If you could share that.
I really like this quote by Christina Baldwin. I think she sums it up nicely when she says, "Words are how we think, but stories are how we link."
Love that. Another great quote that I have shared with some of you before is, "Stories are data with a soul." And that was coined by Brené Brown. Because while the data and the facts and the numbers add validity and substance to your presentation, it's great, it's important. The stories are what connect us as human beings. It's what makes you and your messages memorable to your audience. So I hope these tips were helpful for you tonight. If you have a webinar coming up, 5 tips. The eye, looking at the camera as eye contact. Audience engagement, how to keep them engaged through props and images and questions. 3, using cheat sheets are okay in a webinar. Body language, you don't have to worry about because you're focusing on your facial expressions. And lastly, storytelling. Incorporate storytelling in your webinars. If you would like to connect with me, please write me a message in Facebook. You could email me at jessica@jessicachangconsulting.com, and always check out my website to see how we might be able to work together, jessicachangconsulting.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.